Today through Armageddon, Part 2. In order to fully comprehend the book of Revelation, we need to understand that it is a prophetic history of the political events of our day. The following is a statement concerning the position of the Church on communism, made by President David O. McKay at the General Priesthood Session of the 136th Annual Conference of the Church, held in the Salt Lake Tabernacle, Saturday, April 9th, 1966. In order that there may be no misunderstandings by bishops, stake presidents, and others regarding members of the Church participating in non-church meetings to study and become informed on the Constitution of the United States, communism, etc., I wish to make the following statements that I have been sending out from my office for some time, and that have come under question by some stake authorities, bishoprics, and others. Church members are at perfect liberty to act according to their own consciences in the matter of safeguarding our way of life. They are, of course, encouraged to honor the highest standards of the gospel and to work to preserve their own freedoms. They are free to participate in non-church meetings that are held to warn people of the threat of communism or any other theory or principle that will deprive us of our free agency or individual liberties vouchsafed by the Constitution of the United States. The Church, out of respect for the rights of all its members to have their political views and loyalties, must maintain the strictest possible neutrality. We have no intention of trying to interfere with the fullest and freest exercise of the political franchise of our members under and within our Constitution, which the Lord declared He established by the hand of wise men who He raised up unto this very purpose, D&C 10180, and which, as to the principles thereof, the prophet Joseph Smith, dedicating the Kirtland Temple, prayed should be established forever. In this connection, we are continually being asked to give our opinion concerning various patriotic groups or individuals who are fighting communism and speaking up for freedom. Our immediate concern, however, is not with parties, groups, or persons, but with principles. We therefore commend and encourage every person and every group who is sincerely seeking to study constitutional principles and awaken a sleeping and apathetic people to the alarming conditions that are rapidly advancing about us. We wish all of our citizens throughout the land were participating in some type of organized self-education in order that they could better appreciate what is happening and know what they can do about it. In October of 1966 at BYU, President Ezra Taft Benson stated the following: Satan is anxious to neutralize the inspired counsel of the prophet and keep the priesthood off balance, ineffective, and inert, using perverse reasoning. For example, he will argue, there is no need to get involved in the fight for freedom. All you need to do is live the gospel. This is a contradiction, because we cannot fully live the gospel and not be involved in the fight for freedom. Our position on freedom helped get us to this earth, and it will make the difference as to whether we get back home or not. President Benson has given us the word of the Lord as to the existence of a secret combination that has control over this nation and the entire world, and is increasing its control. Let us begin with President Woodrow Wilson. Speaking of the secret combination, he said, and I quote, "There is a power so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive that prudent men better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." Also speaking of it, Winston Churchill said the following, and I quote, "From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt, who founded the secret order of the Illuminati on May 1, 1776, to those of Karl Marx, to those of Trotsky, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstruction of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence, and impossible equality has been growing. It played a definite, recognizable role in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century, has gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads, and has become practically the undisputed master of that enormous empire. We recognize that this combination must be multifaceted to be able to have such control. To control money, it must be involved in banking. President Thomas Jefferson warned, "The system of banking is a blot left in our constitutions, which, if not covered, will end in their destruction. I sincerely believe that banking institutions are more dangerous than standing armies, and that the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity is but swindling futurity on a large scale." And again he said, "If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their money, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of their property until their children will wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered." President James A. Garfield said, "Whoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce." Sir Josiah Stamp, President of the Bank of England in the 1920s and the second richest man in Britain, said, "Banking was conceived in iniquity and was born in sin. The bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create deposits, and with a flick of the pen they will create enough deposits to buy it back again. However, take it away from them, and all the great fortunes like mine will disappear, and they ought to disappear, for this world would be a happier and a better world to live in. But if you wish to remain the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, let them continue to create deposits." Horace Greeley said, "While boasting of our noble deeds, we are careful to conceal the ugly fact that by an iniquitous money system we have nationalized a system of oppression which, though more refined, is not less cruel than the old system of chattel slavery." President Woodrow Wilson said, "A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the world. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of small groups of dominant men." Just before he died, Wilson is reported to have stated to friends that he had been, quote, "deceived. I have betrayed my country." He referred to the Federal Reserve Act passed during his presidency. From Robert H. Hemphill, credit manager of Federal Reserve Bank, Atlanta, Georgia, we get this. This is a staggering thought. We are completely dependent on the commercial banks. Someone has to borrow every dollar we have in circulation, cash or credit. If the banks create ample synthetic money, we are prosperous. If not, we starve. We are absolutely without a permanent money system. When one gets a complete grasp of the picture, the tragic absurdity of our hopeless position is almost incredible. But there it is. It is the most important subject intelligent persons can investigate and reflect upon. It is so important that our present civilization may collapse unless it becomes widely understood and the defects remedied very soon. Major L.L.B. Angus said, "The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banks can in fact inflate, mint, and unmint the modern ledger entry currency." Congressman Louis T. McFadden said this, "The Federal Reserve banks are one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever seen. There is not a man within the sound of my voice who does not know that this nation is run by the international bankers." Dr. Carroll Quigley, a confessed member of the secret combination, in his book Tragedy and Hope, on page 324, wrote the following: that the goal of the conspiracy is nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. On page 51 of the same book, Dr. Quigley stated how the secret combination worked at gaining control. We read the following: "In time, they brought into their financial network the provincial banking centers, organized as commercial banks and savings banks, as well as insurance companies, to form all of these into a single financial system on an international scale which manipulated the quantity and flow of money so that they were able to influence, if not control, governments on one side and industries on the other. The men who did this aspired to establish dynasties of international bankers and were at least as successful at this as were many of the dynastic political rulers." Now, in lieu of what we have just studied, we can clearly see that this secret combination can do just as John the Revelator said will be done, and that is that there will be a time come that no man may buy or sell without their permission. The immeasurable benefit of Dr. Quigley's book is that he boastfully reveals that there is a secret combination, and that it does now have control of the world's monetary systems and is increasing that control. Let us now summarize to this point. Number 1. We have been told by the prophet President Ezra Taft Benson that there is a secret combination and that it seeks the overthrow of all nations, kindreds, and tongues. Number 2. President Woodrow Wilson felt he had betrayed his country by passing the Federal Reserve Act. Number 3. That whoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. Number 4, that the secret combination is multifaceted and that one of its facets is international banking in order to control the world's economies, and that a monetary system wherein no man may buy or sell is now within their capability. Let us now go on to another facet of the secret combination: socialistic governments. President Ezra Taft Benson's conference address on socialism and communism of October 1961 in the December 1961 improvement era reads as follows: What is the official position of the Church on communism? In 1936, the first presidency made an official declaration on communism which has never been abrogated. I quote the concluding paragraph: We call upon all church members completely to eschew communism. The safety of our divinely inspired constitutional government and the welfare of our church imperatively demand that communism shall have no place in America. We must ever keep in mind that the collectivized socialism is part of the communist strategy. Communism is fundamentally socialism. We will never win our fight against communism by making concessions to socialism. Communism and socialism, closely related, must be defeated on principle. The close relationship between socialism and communism is clearly pointed out by Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina in a letter to the editor of Washington Post of August 6, 1961, in these words: Both socialism and communism derived from the teachings of Marx and Engels. In fact, the movements were one until the split over methods of approach which resulted after the Russian Revolution in 1905. The aim and purpose of both was then and is now world socialism, which communism seeks to achieve through revolution and which socialists seek to achieve through evolution. The industrial achievements of the U.S. are the result of an economic system which is the antithesis of socialism. Our economic system is called capitalism or private enterprise and is based on private property rights, the profit motive, and competition. Both communism and socialism seek to destroy our economic system and replace it with socialism, and their success, whether through evolution by socialism or through revolution by communism or a combination, will destroy not only our economic system but our liberty, including the civil aspects as well. The common ground of socialism and communism is a factor to which the American people should be alerted. Without a clear understanding that communism is socialism, the total threat and menace of the Cold War can never be comprehended and fought to victory. President Benson said the secret combination is increasing its control over the world, not lessening it. By this we know that the opening of the communist bloc countries was a goal of the combination. It is a minor step from socialism back to repressive communism. President Benson goes on to say, the socialistic communist conspiracy to weaken the United States involves attacks on many fronts. To weaken the American free enterprise economy, which outproduced both its enemies and allies during World War II, is a high priority of the communist leaders. Their press and other propaganda media are therefore constantly selling the principles of centralized or federal control of farms, railroads, electric power, schools, steel, maritime shipping, and many other aspects of the economy, but always in the name of public welfare. This carries out the strategy laid down by communist masters. John Strachey, a top official in the Labour Socialist Party of Great Britain, in his book entitled The Theory and Practice of Socialism, said, and I quote, "It is impossible to establish communism as the immediate successor to capitalism. It is accordingly proposed to establish socialism as something which we can put in the place of our present decaying capitalism. Hence, communists worked for the establishment of socialism as a necessary transition stage on the road to communism," unquote. In a letter of May 25, 1967, President David O. McKay wrote, and I quote, "None of the doctrines of our church give any sanction to the concept of a socialist state." And from his book, Secrets of a Happy Life, I quote, "During the first half of the 20th century, we have traveled far into the soul-destroying land of socialism and made strange alliances through which we have become involved in almost continuous hot and cold wars over the whole of the earth. In this retreat from freedom, the voices of protesting citizens have been drowned by raucous shouts of intolerance and abuse from those who led the retreat, and from their millions of gullible youth who are marching merrily to their doom. Intoxicated with pride in our achievement, enmeshed in the interesting problems still unsolved, we have left unguarded the gate through which are pouring the destructive hordes and forces of a new invasion of barbarism." In the Millennial Star, page 967, President Heber J. Grant stated, "There are different views among socialists as to the manner in which this radical change is to be effected, but when pressed to a declaration of their intents, the declaration is made that when a sufficient number of adherents to socialism is obtained, holding the voting power, a government is to be set up by this majority which will exercise compulsory force to dispossess property owners, and the establishment of a tyranny greater than any form of oppression ever known to the world." As we now know that communism and socialism are the same, let me read a statement from President David O. McKay, and I quote, "Since communism established would destroy our American constitutional government, to support communism is treasonable to our free institutions, and no patriotic American citizen may become either a communist or supporter of communism," unquote. Finally, let us quote from Prophets, Principles, and National Survival by Gerald L. Newquist on page 335. This quote is from Howard E. Kirshner of Christian Economics, 4/17/1962, and I quote, "Stalin advised the late William Foster that the American people would never accept socialism or communism, and that the only hope of imposing a red regime in the United States was a consistent but gradual increase in local and federal public ownership projects. Publicly owned operations, he pointed out, paid little, if any, taxes, and in the end result in a final acceptance of complete government ownership and operation. That, he explained, is communism. Every new local or federal public ownership project, said Stalin, is an added nail in the coffin that will finally contain capitalism. The tax burden will become greater every year for the American people, and each government-owned operation will throw an added burden on the private taxpayers. It is obvious that the camel's back of capitalism will finally break under an unbearable burden, Stalin told Foster, that the average left-wing American liberal who would be insulted at being called a socialist or a communist would enthusiastically use all of his influence to bring about more and more public ownership operations in the field of natural resources, transportation, and other commercial lines. That is the way we must enlist the left-wing liberals in all walks of life, not only in the United States, but in all Latin America as well. For those who trust Mr. Mikhail Gorbachev, in a statement to the Politburo in 1987, he stated the following: "Gentlemen, comrades, do not be concerned about all you hear about glasnost and perestroika and democracy in the coming years. These are primarily for outward consumption. There will be no significant internal change within the Soviet Union other than for cosmetic purposes. Our purpose is to disarm the Americans and let them fall asleep. We want to accomplish three things. 1. We want the Americans to withdraw conventional forces from Europe. 2. We want them to withdraw nuclear forces from Europe. 3. We want the Americans to stop proceeding with the Strategic Defense Initiative." Let us again summarize. Number 1. Socialism and communism are the same. Number 2. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not sanction socialism in any form. Number 3. The United States has traveled far into the soul-destroying land of socialism. Number 4. That support of communism, socialism is treasonable to our free institutions. Number 5. Joseph Stalin spoke truly of our day and condition. Number 6. Again, the secret combination seeks to control all nations, kindreds, and tongues, using socialism, communism, which is complete government control of all aspects of life. The third facet of the secret combination is a one-world government or New World Order, which is a world governed by the United Nations. Speaking of the UN Charter in 1945, J. Reuben Clark said the following: "There seems no reason to doubt that such real approval as the Charter has among the people is based upon the belief that if the Charter is put into effect, wars will end. The Charter will not certainly end war. Some will ask why not. In the first place, there is no provision in the Charter itself that contemplates ending war. It is true the Charter provides for force to bring peace, but such use of force is itself war. The Charter is built to prepare for war, not to promote peace. The Charter is a war document, not a peace document. Not only does the Charter organization not prevent future wars, but it makes it practically certain that we shall have future wars. And as to such wars, it takes from us the power to declare them, to choose the side on which we shall fight, to determine what forces and military equipment we shall use in the war, and to control and command our sons who do the fighting." Elder Stephen L. Richards, in Conference Report, October of 1947, said the following: "Have you ever heard of a voice being raised in any of the sessions of the United Nations since its inception more than 2 years ago, protesting the infractions of God's laws or importuning His help in achieving the purposes of that organization? I think you have not, unless perhaps in some innocuous way, because I suspect that it is tacitly agreed that God and religion shall be shut out of the proceedings. Well, my friends, it is a part of the message that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints bears to the world, that God and religion cannot be shut out from the consideration of world affairs without mortal hazard to the cause of goodness and peace. Albert E. Bowen, in Conference Report October of 1950, said the following: "We seem to be trying now to rear a government whose proponents and sponsors cannot even invoke divine blessing upon their deliberations or its destiny. What chance do you think it has to heal the wounds of the world?" Let us now read some statements from President Ezra Taft Benson's book, An Enemy Hath Done This, pages 201, 202, and 203. It has always been a source of amazement to me how so many Americans properly are concerned over the growth of big government and the welfare state here at home, but continue to give their unqualified support to the UN, which incorporates every doctrine which they abhor. The reason, I suppose, is that too few of us have taken the time or felt the need to find out just what is the concept of government at the UN. After many years of observing the UN in operation, after carefully researching the less publicized aspects of this organization, and after a great deal of soul-searching, I reluctantly have been forced to the conclusion that the UN's potential for evil far outweighs its potential for good. Furthermore, the very nature of the organization is such that this evil cannot be corrected without disbanding and starting all over from the bottom up. I wish with all my heart that this were not true, but it is true, and the issue is far too important for the future of mankind to allow sentimentality to cloud our vision. It's about time someone placed principle above popularity and came right out and spoke the truth. Supporters of the UN often tell us how wonderful it is that all nations can come together under a single room and air their problems in open debate. The implication, of course, is that this procedure is a way of blowing off steam, a safety valve that somehow reduces the international tensions that otherwise might lead to war. How utterly absurd. Consider what would happen if every time a small spat arose between a husband and wife, they called the entire neighborhood together and took turns airing their complaints in front of the whole group. Would there be much real chance of reconciliation? Instead of working out their problems together, the necessity of saving face, proving points, and winning popular sympathy would likely drive them further apart. Not only that, by the time the issue was put to a vote, the neighbors would be forced into taking sides. Suddenly their own ranks would be divided, and they would return to their homes to continue a quarrel that previously wasn't even known to them. What starts out as an argument between two people now infects the entire neighborhood with bitterness and dissension. Exactly the same kind of thing happens daily as the UN diplomats stand in front of the General Assembly, shake their fingers at each other, hurl insults at each other, and then ask all nations of the world to choose up sides. Far from being a procedure calculated to preserve peace, this kind of madness can only increase the likelihood of war. Let us now go to the statement of Secretary General Hugh Thant of the United Nations in a press dispatch in the Los Angeles Times of April 7, 1970. Lenin was a man with a mind of great clarity and incisiveness, and his ideas have had a profound influence on the course of contemporary history. Lenin's ideals of peace and peaceful coexistence among states have won widespread international acceptance, and they are in line with the aims of the UN Charter. In its issue for December 12, 1952, U.S. News and World Report noted, "An informed estimate suggests that as many as one-half of the 1,350 administrative executives in the UN are either communists or people who are willing to do what they want." On March 22, 1954, the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee reported, "In our investigation of United States citizens employed by the United Nations, we found considerable evidence to indicate that communists use the same techniques in infiltrating the UN Secretariat as had previously been used in infiltrating the United States government. Some of these persons exposed in our government investigation played key roles in the actual establishment of the UN itself, as well as the establishment of the UN's specialized agencies." On February 14, 1961, United Nations Ambassador Adlai Stevenson addressed the United Nations Correspondents Association and stated, "Help us to create the sense of our overriding human concern. Interpret us to each other not as plotters or as warmongers or as demons or demigods, but as puzzled yet aspiring men and women struggling on the possible brink of Armageddon to achieve a common understanding and a common approach. We are not at all like that, I have no doubt. But I believe the majority of our delegates would accept such a description of their own attitudes. The whole press corps working at the United Nations has a unique part to play in projecting this picture." In Christian Economics of August 6, 1963, Mr. George Winter stated, "The United Nations is not a Christian organization. It is unashamedly godless. Christian principles have no guiding influence on the majority of the nations whose representatives in the United Nations now sit in judgment on the Congo and tomorrow may claim jurisdiction over the Panama Canal, the Guantanamo Naval Base, and indeed over the whole world. One cannot be precise, but probably the majority of the members of the United Nations are dictatorships having no idea of justice as understood by Christian nations. How many gods are worshipped in that edifice of steel and glass on the East River in New York it is impossible to say. For aught we know, the dark gods of Dahomey and Behin may have their followers there, seeking to govern the world. But the most evil and probably the most powerful of all the gods worshipped in that United Nations is undoubtedly that evil spirit men call economic determinism, which fills its worshippers with a fanatical enmity for human freedom. Only a civilization which has lost confidence in the Christian code upon which it was built would submit to the moral authority of such a body as the United Nations. Man has created a godless power to govern the world. Can human folly reach greater depths? In light of all that we have learned about the United Nations, let us now take the words of President George Bush. In a televised address of September 1990, he spoke the following words: "Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge. We are now in sight of a United Nations that performs as envisioned by its founders." His statement in U.S. News and World Report of January 7, 1991. I think what's at stake here is the New World Order. What's at stake here is whether we can have disputes peacefully resolved in the future by a reinvigorated United Nations, or will the United Nations, its peacekeeping function, having been elevated to its most promising height since 1948, be sent back to the Dark Ages because we failed to fulfill its mandate? In a press conference of January 9th, 1991, he stated, "The Gulf crisis has to do with a new world order, and that world order is only going to be enhanced if this newly activated peacekeeping function of the United Nations proves to be effective. That is the only way the new world order will be enhanced." And finally, in a televised address of January 16, 1991, "When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN founders." President Bush evidently defines a new world order as a United Nations that performs as envisioned by its founders. The United States delegation to the founding of the United Nations contained 16 secret communists led by Alger Hiss, and 43 members of the World Government Promoting Council on Foreign Relations. These individuals helped lay the groundwork for an all-powerful UN, supposedly designed to enforce peace. But if this UN is all-powerful, it can also enforce tyranny. In the book Prophets, Principles, and National Survival by Gerald L. Newquist, on page 457 we read the following: "Frankly now, are we as rational beings, in the light of history, the signs of the times, and the revelations of the Restoration and the Bible, realistically justified in putting our hopes and expectations for peace in the United Nations? Doing so, are we not again hoping to gather grapes of thorns and figs of thistles?" As of November 11, 1990, the United Nations was recognized as the only power holding the authority to wage war. Our own President, George Bush, went not to Congress first, but to the UN Security Council for authority to wage war in Iraq. Thus, he evidently believes the UN Charter is more valid than our Constitution, and it is here that his allegiance lies. President Theodore Roosevelt stated, "Patriotism means to stand by the country. It does not mean to stand by the President or any other public official, save exactly to the degree in which he himself stands by the country. It is patriotic to support him insofar as he efficiently serves the country. It is unpatriotic not to oppose him to the exact extent that by inefficiency or otherwise he fails in his duty to stand by the country." In the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen, all of the facets of the secret combination are discussed: the international bankers, socialism, communism, the United Nations, and the New World Order. On the back cover of the book is a statement by President Ezra Taft Benson, and I quote, "I wish that every citizen of every country in the free world and every slave behind the Iron Curtain might read this book," unquote. Let us recap again. Number 1. The United Nations Charter is a war document, not a peace document. Number 2, there is no place for God in the UN, and its potential for evil far outweighs its potential for good. Number 3, the Charter of the United Nations is opposite to our Constitution, and if adhered to, would destroy us. Number 4, the United Nations Charter is in line with the aims of Vladimir Lenin. Number 5, only a civilization which has lost confidence in the Christian code would be governed by the United Nations. Number 6, President Bush agrees that the United Nations Charter should govern the world. Number 7, the United Nations is the world government of the secret combination. In the first tape of this series, we showed scripturally how the second coming of our Lord Jesus Christ is in the sixth seal, which will end April 5th of the year 2000. We also showed scripturally that there are three 3.5 year time periods that take place before the second coming. This is a total of 10.5 years. If we take 10.5 years from the end of the sixth seal of April 5th, 2000, then we know that the latest that the first time period began was October of 1989 and will end with Adam coming to Adam-Mondiaman no later than April of 1993. The second period will begin no later than April of 1993 at Adam-Mondiaman and will end no later than October of 1996 when the Jewish military power is broken and the two prophets come to Jerusalem. The third time period begins no later than October 1996 when the two prophets come to Jerusalem and Jerusalem again is under siege, and will end when Christ puts his feet on the Mount of Olives, which can be no later than the end of the sixth seal. Now let's take an in-depth look at the first time period, October of 1989 to April of 1993. In the book of Revelation, chapter 13, verses 1 through 7 and verses 11 through 18, we read, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he make fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by the sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Now let's go back and take a look at the verses we have just read, verse by verse. We established in the first tape of this series that Joseph Smith the prophet said that the beast spoken of represented the kingdoms of men, and the preface of this chapter also states this. The cross-referencing also establishes this same fact. John clearly saw our day. The 7 heads representing 7 countries are in existence today. They are known as the Group of 7, or the 7 leading industrialized nations. In the Wall Street Journal of April 8, 1991, we read, "In short, the world badly needs economic leadership. But the U.S. cannot go it alone. If the New World Order that President Bush is so fond of mentioning means anything, it means that today's world requires global cooperation. And in the economic sphere, the so-called Group of 7, which includes the central bankers and finance ministers of the 7 leading industrial nations, offers the best hope for such cooperation. This shows that the secret combination is fully involved in this matter." In the Deseret News of May 23, 1991, we read who those 7 nations are. Gorbachev says he hopes to get an invitation to the July summit meeting in London of the G7 countries: the United States, Canada, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. We know that the economies of these 7 nations support the whole earth, and thus we see that they truly support the nations of Europe represented by the 10 horns. Verse 2. Remember that the beasts and their parts represent the nations of the earth. President Ezra Taft Benson, in his conference address of April 4th, 1986, entitled "The Power of the Word," said of the dragon is Satan. Verse 3. Out of the group of 7 nations, there is only one nation that received a wound that looked deadly and was healed. and that nation is Germany. It was seen to be healed by the whole world on television as the wall separating East and West Germany was torn down. Anyone watching that television episode of the wall coming down could understand that the whole world truly wondered. Verse 4. It is easy to see that men do worship Satan today by the wickedness they accept and revel in. President Benson, in his Power of the Word speech, stated, "We live in a day of great challenge. We live in that time of which the Lord spoke when he said, 'Peace shall be taken from the earth, and the devil shall have power over his own dominion.' There is no power on earth greater than the Christian nations today, truly fulfilling John's word." Verse 5. With all the perversions taught by men and sanctioned by governments, truly we have blasphemies spoken today. It is very important to understand that in order for something to continue, it must have already existed. We learned in the previous tape number 1, that this beast was destroyed and given to the burning flame when Adam sat at Adam-on-Diamond. So John is giving us some of the main events that will transpire during the last 42 months of the beast. Verse 7. Remember, the beast previously existed, and in President Ezra Taft Benson's address of April 4th, 1986, entitled "The Power of the Word," we are told it existed then and was making war with the saints. The dragon is Satan. The woman represents the Church of Jesus Christ. Satan is waging war against the members of the church who have testimonies and are trying to keep the commandments. And while many of our members are remaining faithful and strong, some are wavering, some are falling. Some are fulfilling John's prophecy that in the war with Satan, some saints would be overcome. See Revelations 13:7. Now verse 11. In order to understand this verse, we must first go to Daniel chapter 7, verse 7, 8, and 24. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. We see here that when the little horn or leader of the secret combination gains full power, and he is a man, he reduces the 10 horns to 7, making the beast have 7 heads and 7 horns, and him exercising all the power of the beast. Now to verse 24. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. This second beast is the little horn. His coming up like a lamb seems to symbolize his having been a follower of Jesus Christ. And his speaking as a dragon seems to mean he has gone over to Satan. To understand more about this man, we must go to Daniel chapter 11, verses 36, 37, and 38 as follows. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver, and with precious stones and pleasant things. Here he claims to be above God, and shall speak blasphemy against God. He will care nothing for his religious background. If his fathers knew not Satan, then they had to have been followers of the true and living God, or in other words, members of the Church of Jesus Christ. Chapter 2 of 2 Thessalonians seems to speak of just such a man that comes after the restoration of the gospel in the latter days. Verses 3 and 4 read as follows. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, shewing himself that he is God. Verse 12. Here John says the little horn is given the full power of the seven-headed beast that existed before him. Verse 13. Let us go to President Ezra Taft Benson's conference address of October 1961. The great destructive force which was to be turned loose on the earth, and which the prophets for centuries have been calling the abomination of desolation, is vividly described by those who saw it in vision. Ours is the first generation to realize how literally these prophecies can be fulfilled now that God, through science, has unlocked the secret to thermonuclear reaction. In the light of these prophecies, there should be no doubt in the mind of any priesthood holder that the human family is headed for trouble. There are rugged days ahead. It is time for every man who wishes to do his duty to get himself prepared physically, spiritually, and psychologically for the task which may come at any time, as suddenly as the whirlwind. Elder Bruce R. McConkie of the Council of the 12 stated the following in General Conference of April 1979. It may be, for instance, that nothing except the power of faith and the authority of the priesthood can save individuals and congregations from the atomic holocaust that surely shall be. Verse 14. As members of the church, we must always follow the prophet, that we are not deceived, for many things are going to transpire that are meant to deceive. Verse 15. The nations of today each have images or seals that tell you who they are and their power structure. And there is no reason to believe that this system won't have theirs. It states that if you do not give your allegiance to theirs, They will seek your life. Verse 16. The dictionary describes a mark as a visible impression or a peculiarity or distinguishing figure. There will have to be a worldwide false peace and an agreement among nations in order to instigate such widespread acceptance. If one was to couple a false peace with a worldwide depression or economic collapse, it would make such a system even more acceptable. Both of these conditions approach us today. President George Bush stated the following on September 11, 1990. A new partnership of nations has begun, a new world order, stronger in the pursuit of justice and more secure in the quest for peace. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace. Verse 17. If we as Latter-day Saints do not have our year's supply, we will be included in that which is here described, or starve. Verse 18. Here we are again told that this second beast is a man, and that the system that will be used will be a numbering system. Anyone seeing credit cards or a debit system should realize that such a system could be instigated today. In the world's numbering of such systems, 666 denotes international numbering. Every Latter-day Saint will have to be wise enough to follow the Lord's prophet when the system comes, and to have been wise enough to have prepared ahead for such a day. We know that true Latter-day Saints will not take the mark of the beast. Some, in reading the Scriptures, have believed and taught that the mark would last 42 months. Let us here note that when we read about the mark, that nowhere does it say that the mark lasts 42 months. It only states that the second beast brings in the mark, and that he comes up sometime during the last 42 months of the first beast's existence. We have been told by the prophet of God to have a 1 year supply of food, fuel, and clothing, not a 3 1/2 years supply. If the mark was going to last 3 1/2 years, our living prophet today would have said a 3 1/2 years supply, not just 1 year's supply. A supply of food would have to last from harvest to harvest to be replenished. Let's look at some of the things we have been told with regards to food storage. President Spencer W. Kimball at Welfare Services meeting of April 6, 1974 said the following: "The little gardens and the few trees are very valuable. I remember when the sisters used to say, 'Well, but we could buy it at the store a lot cheaper than we can put it up.' But that isn't quite the answer, is it, Sister Spafford? Because there will come a time when there isn't a store. When the mark comes and no man can buy or sell but with the mark, there will be no stores for the Latter-day Saints then, will there?" In an address given by President Ezra Taft Benson in the priesthood session of General Conference on October 3, 1987, he stated, "I ask you earnestly, have you provided for your family a year's supply of food, clothing, and where possible fuel? The revelation to produce and store food may be as essential to our temporal welfare today as boarding the ark was to the people in the days of Noah." Unquote. Remember, only those who had an ark survived. In April conference of 1976, Elder Vaughn J. Featherstone stated, "For 26 years, since I was 15, I was involved in the grocery industry. I learned much about human nature during those years. I remember the effect that strikes, earthquakes, and rumors of war had on many very active Latter-day Saints. Like the 5 foolish virgins, they rushed to the store to buy food, caught in the panic of knowing that direction had been given by the prophet, but not having followed that direction, fearful that maybe they had procrastinated until it was everlastingly too late." In April conference of 1979, Elder Bruce R. McConkie stated, "I stand before the church this day and raise the warning voice. It is a prophetic voice, for I shall say only what the apostles and prophets have spoken concerning our day. It is a voice calling upon the Lord's people to prepare for the troubles and desolations which are about to be poured out upon the world without measure. For the moment we live in a day of peace and prosperity, but it shall not ever be thus. Great trials lie ahead. All of the sorrows and perils of the past are but a foretaste of what is yet to be, and we must prepare ourselves temporally and spiritually." Now some statements on important events and where the Latter-day Saints and good honest people who support the Constitution will gather and be when the time of the mark comes. The prophet Joseph Smith stated, "Peace will be taken from the earth, and there will be no peace only in the Rocky Mountains. This will cause many hundreds and thousands of the honest in heart to gather there, not because they would be saints, but for safety, and because they would not take up the sword against their neighbor." President Brigham Young stated, "An inland empire will be established in these valleys of the mountains, which will be a place of refuge for millions of people to gather to when the great day of the judgments of God comes upon the earth, and the righteous come here for safety. Our people will go east, west, north, and south, but the day will come when they will be glad to come back. We will be shut out from the rest of the world." He also stated, "We are blessed in these mountains. This is the best place on earth for the Latter-day Saints. Search for the history of all nations and every geographical position upon the face of the earth, and you cannot find another situation so well adapted for the saints as are these mountains. Here is the place in which the Lord designed to hide His people. It has been designed for many generations to hide up the saints in the last days, until the indignation of the Almighty be over. His wrath will be poured out upon the nations of the earth." Let's look now at the conditions that will be upon us at that time. President Brigham Young stated, "By and by there will be a gulf between the righteous and the wicked, so that they cannot trade with each other, and national intercourse will cease." President Heber C. Kimball stated, "Lay up your stores and take your silks and fine things, and exchange them for grain and such things as you need. And the time will come when we will be obliged to depend upon our own resources. For the time is not far distant when the curtain will be dropped between us and the United States. When that time comes, brethren and sisters, you will wish you had commenced sooner to make your own clothing. I tell you, God requires us to go into home manufacture, and prolong it as much as you like, you have got to do it." Now Orson Pratt, "And the time will come when we shall find ourselves restricted, and when it will be very important indeed for us to patronize home productions, and cease sending our millions abroad for importations, for the gate will be shut down, and circumstances will be such that we cannot bring things from abroad, and hence the necessity of the exhortation that we have received from time to time, to engage with all our hearts in the various branches of industry, necessary to make us self-sustaining, and to carry them out with all the tact and wisdom which God has given to us, that we may become free and independent in all these matters, free before the heavens, and free from all the nations of the earth and their productions, so far as being dependent upon them is concerned. Many members of the church believe nothing bad can happen until we have taken the gospel to every nation, kindred, and tongue. This is not what the prophets have taught. Joseph Smith stated, "The servants of God will not have gone over the nations of the Gentiles with a warning voice until the destroying angel will commence to waste the inhabitants of the earth. And as the prophet hath said, it shall be a vexation to hear the report. I speak thus because I feel for my fellow men. I do it in the name of the Lord, being moved upon by the Holy Spirit." We know that when the mark comes, the elders will have to come home. Brigham Young stated, "When the testimony of the elders ceases to be given, and the Lord says to them, 'Come home,' I will now preach my own sermons to the nations of the earth. All you now know can scarcely be called a preface to the sermon that will be preached with fire and sword, tempests and earthquakes, hail, rain, thunders and lightnings, and fearful destruction. What matters the destruction of a few railway cars? You will hear of magnificent cities now idolized by the people, sinking in the earth, entombing the inhabitants. The sea will heave itself beyond its bounds, engulfing mighty cities. Famine will spread over the nations, and nation will rise up against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and states against states in our own country and in foreign lands, and they will destroy each other, caring not for the blood and lives of their neighbors, of their families, or for their own lives." We learned in tape number 1 that the scriptures say that the nations of Europe and those who have come out of them, including this nation, will be destroyed along with he who put out the mark at the coming of Adam to Adam-on-Diamond. The prophet Joseph Smith stated, "I prophesy that the man who tarries after he has an opportunity of going will be afflicted by the devil. Wars are at hand. We must not delay, but are not required to sacrifice. We ought to have the building up of Zion as our greatest object. When wars come, we shall have to flee to Zion. The cry is to make haste. The last revelation says, 'Ye shall not have time to have gone over the earth until these things come.' It will come as did the cholera, war, fires, and earthquakes, one pestilence after another, until the Ancient of Days comes. Then judgment will be given to the saints." For this nation to accept the mark, it would have to become the law of the land, and they would have to destroy the Constitution to adopt it. It would destroy our free agency. Today, many believe if it is legal, it is moral. Let us examine what the prophets have taught us as to where we should stand. Let us now read from President Ezra Taft Benson's talk of 1986, "The Constitution, a Heavenly Banner." To all who have discerning eyes, it is apparent that the Republican form of government established by our noble forefathers, cannot long endure once fundamental principles are abandoned. Momentum is gathering for another conflict, a repetition of the crisis of 200 years ago. This collision of ideas is worldwide. Another monumental moment is soon to be born. The issue is the same that precipitated the great premortal conflict. Will men be free to determine their own course of action, or must they be coerced? We are fast approaching that moment prophesied by Joseph Smith when he said, "Even this nation will be on the very verge of crumbling to pieces and tumbling to the ground. And when the Constitution is upon the brink of ruin, this people will be the staff upon which the nation shall lean, and they shall bear the Constitution away from the very verge of destruction." I reverence the Constitution of the United States as a sacred document. To me, its words are akin to the revelations of God, for God has placed His stamp of approval on the Constitution of this land. I testify that the God of heaven sent some of His choicest spirits to lay the foundation of this government, and He has sent other choice spirits, even you who read my words, to preserve it. In 1879, President John Taylor stated, "We have got to establish a government upon the principle of righteousness, justice, truth, and equality, and not according to the many false notions that exist among men. And then the day is not far distant when this nation will be shaken from center to circumference. And now you may write it down, any of you, and I will prophesy it in the name of God, and then will be fulfilled that prediction to be found in one of the revelations given through the prophet Joseph Smith. Those who will not take up their sword to fight against their neighbor must needs flee to Zion for safety, and they will come, saying, 'We do not know anything of the principles of your religion, but we perceive that you are an honest community. You administer justice and righteousness, and we want to live with you and receive the protection of your laws. But as for your religion, we will talk about that some other time. Will we protect such people? Yes, all honorable men. When the people shall have torn to shreds the Constitution of the United States, the elders of Israel will be found holding it up to the nations of the earth and proclaiming liberty and equal rights to all men, and extending the hand of fellowship to the oppressed of all nations. This is part of the program, and as long as we do what is right and fear God, He will help us and stand by us under all circumstances." He also stated, the prophet Joseph Smith said that, quote, "The Constitution of the United States was given by the inspiration of God," unquote. "But good, virtuous, and holy principles may be perverted by corrupt and wicked men. The Lord was opposed by Satan. Jesus had his Judas, and this nation abounds with traitors who ignore that sacred palladium of liberty and seek to trample it underfoot. Joseph Smith said they would do so, and that when deserted by all, the elders of Israel would rally around its shattered fragments and save and preserve it inviolate." John the Revelator warns of the consequences of taking the mark. We read chapter 14, verses 9 through 12. "And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, and they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast in his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Let us now recap about where the saints will be at the time of the mark. Number 1. When the mark is put in place and the judgments are poured out upon the nations, peace will be taken from the earth, and peace will only be found in the Rocky Mountains. Number 2. We will establish an inland empire here in the Rocky Mountains. Those of us who have left will be glad to return. We will be shut out from the rest of the world. Here is the place the Lord designed to hide his people. Number 3. As Latter-day Saints, we've been counseled to stay in the various areas we are in and build up the church. But we are told the time will come when we will gather as a people in the valleys of the Rocky Mountains. When the mark comes and the Lord pours out his judgments upon the nations, we will be found there holding up the standard of the Constitution to all honorable men. As for the saints in foreign lands, it has not been revealed where they will gather, but we suppose the Lord will provide for them as he will for us. Let us recap on the Constitution. Number 1. The Lord sent some of his choicest spirits to lay the foundations of this government and Constitution. And others of us who read President Benson's words will defend and preserve it. Number 2. This nation abounds with traitors who would destroy the Constitution. Number 3. The elders of Israel will bear the Constitution away from the brink of ruin. Let us now go to the book of Revelation, chapter 17, verses 7 through 14 and verse 17, and read the interpretation given to John of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman, and of the beast that carried her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. And here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, and there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was, and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords, and King of kings, and they that are with him are called, and chosen, and faithful. For God hath put it in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. Now let's take the verses we have just read one at a time, for John the Revelator is giving us a history lesson, and to fully understand it, we must put ourselves in John's day and move from then to the present time. Verse 7. This is plain to the understanding. The woman represents Babylon, or the world, and the beast is the 8th kingdom. Verse 8. We must now put ourselves in John's shoes. John saw the beast, so it was. The words "is not" means it did not exist in John's day. And the words "yet is" means it would exist at some future time. Thus, past tense, present tense, and future tense in speaking. Verse 9. The words mountains here are symbolic of places of great power or strength. Verse 10. In order to understand this verse, we must remain in John's day. John here is speaking of world-dominating kingdoms of men, for as the angel tells him, 5 are fallen and 1 is, which is the Roman Empire under which John lived. Rome was the world-dominant power of his day. There were 5 world powers that preceded Rome. They were: first, Egypt; second, Assyria; third, Babylon; fourth, Medo-Persia; fifth, Greece; and of course the 6th was Rome. Now the 7th kingdom, or world power, was yet future, and would only last a short space. We are not told who the 7th kingdom or power is in this verse. Verse 11. Here we are told of the 8th kingdom. It says the 8th kingdom is of the 7 kingdoms before it, telling us that its roots or supporters are in all nations, kindreds, and tongues. Or the descendants of these world kingdoms still exist in various nations today. It is a worldwide secret combination. Let us quote President Ezra Taft Benson in his conference talk titled "I Testify" of October 1988. He states, "A secret combination that seeks to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries is increasing its evil influence and control over America and the entire world." We know that all secret combinations are founded of the devil and must be thrust down to hell. Verse 12. In order to understand this verse, we must study and discuss verses 12, 13, and 17 at the same time. Here we are told that the 7th kingdom would come into power when 10 European nations made an agreement together and became of one mind. From the fall of Rome until after World War II, there was no world power. During that time, the European nations were at odds one with another and would not even come to one another's defense. And so most were subjugated by Hitler. On April 4th, 1949, the 10 European nations, or 10 toes, described by President Spencer W. Kimball, came together just as John foresaw. This agreement between the 10 European nations, and along with the United States and Canada, produced the seventh world power or kingdom known as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Although other nations joined later, there were exactly 10 European nations that signed the first treaty, and those nations were: number 1, Belgium; number 2, Denmark; number 3, France; number 4, Great Britain; number 5, Iceland; number 6, Italy; number 7, Luxembourg; number 8, Netherlands; number 9, Norway; and number 10, Portugal. The other two signers of that treaty were the United States and Canada, both having European roots. We are told here that the seventh kingdom would last 1 hour, and at the end of that hour it would give its power and kingdom to the eighth beast, or world power. No world kingdom could come into power and last just 60 minutes in man's time. So we must read 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8 for understanding of an hour. But, beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. From this verse, we get one day with the Lord is as 1,000 years upon the earth. If we divide 1,000 years by 24, we get 41 years and 8 months equaling 1 hour. History shows that 41 years and 8 months from the signing of NATO brought us to November of 1990. At the end of that 41 years and 8 months, these 10 kings would give their power and strength and kingdom to the eighth beast. This they did. The United Nations is the governmental arm of the secret combination, or eighth beast. On November 11, 1990, the United Nations, exercising the power given it by the seventh kingdom, declared war on Iraq, thus fulfilling the scriptures. In order to understand the statement in verse 12 as to receiving power as kings 1 hour with the beast, we need to elaborate further. Here we are told that when the seventh kingdom, or NATO, came into power, that the eighth kingdom already existed. In other words, the secret combination existed and was working towards ruling the world at that time. The UN was organized by the secret combination in 1945, preparatory to ruling the earth. For clarity, let's read again from an October 1961 conference address by President Ezra Taft Benson. One of the most urgent, heart-stirring appeals made by Moroni as he closed the Book of Mormon was addressed to the Gentile nations of the last days. He foresaw the rise of a great worldwide secret combination among the Gentiles, which seeketh to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries. Ether 8:25. He warned each Gentile nation of the last days to purge itself of this gigantic criminal conspiracy which would seek to rule the world. It was a secret political party which operated as a murder cult. Its object was to infiltrate legitimate government, plant its officers in high places, then seize power and live off the spoils appropriated from the people. It would start out as a small group of dissenters, and by using secret oaths with the threat of death for defectors, it would gradually gain a chokehold on the political and economic life of whole civilizations. And now again from President Benson's 1988 conference address titled, "I Testify." A secret combination that seeks to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries is increasing its evil influence and control over America and the entire world. And from President Benson's 1986 conference address entitled, "The Power of the Word," we read, "The dragon is Satan. The woman represents the Church of Jesus Christ. Satan is waging war against the members of the church who have testimonies and are trying to keep the commandments. And while many of our members are remaining faithful and strong, some are wavering, some are falling, some are fulfilling John's prophecy that in the war with Satan, some saints would be overcome. See Revelations 13 and 7. We now know how the secret combination works and how it progresses and what its goals are. Total control of the whole world. We can now see more clearly that this secret combination, or eighth beast, was growing into a worldwide power base during the seventh kingdom, taking in the 7 heads and 10 horns. Its gaining power over the 7 heads and 10 horns was accomplished by April of 1986, and the 10 horns having given over their power and kingdom to the secret combination was fulfilled in November of 1990. The scriptures say that one of the next things to happen is for the secret combination, or eighth beast, to bring forth their leader, who Daniel in his 7th chapter calls the little horn, and John calls the false prophet. This is he who has 2 horns as a lamb and speaks as a dragon. He brings forth a marking system wherein no man may buy or sell without it. Now for further clarification that he is a false prophet, let's read Book of Revelation chapter 19 verse 20. "And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone." There are many who have written on the subject of economic collapse. We as a people have been warned that there will be no stores by President Spencer W. Kimball, that there would be economic disaster, famine, and that the economies of nations will fail by President Benson, that we would have to be prepared to handle these emergencies. The secret combination knows that their cashless society cannot be put into place without first getting rid of all present economies and bringing about a condition wherein all people will accept an economy where everyone is marked and cannot buy or sell without it. Today, we as a people have already been conditioned to a predominantly cashless society by way of checking accounts, credit cards, debit cards, bank transfers, barcodes, etc. When the economies of nations fail, any one or a combination of these forms could be used to identify us and bring in a totally cashless society run by the international banking, the heart of the secret combination. Gold and silver backing for paper money is not used today in any economy. Many older people remember the days after World War I and prior to Adolf Hitler in Germany, when, as the economy of that nation failed, they hauled their paper money around in wheelbarrows to buy a loaf of bread, and the cost of bread doubled from morning till evening. If our paper money becomes worthless, who will exchange bread for worthless paper, even by the wheelbarrow load? The secret combination knows this better than anyone, as they help cause such situations, and they also know that people in jeopardy and hopelessness will accept any salvation, even to giving up their freedom in exchange for food. There are three economic groups being put together in the world today. Number one, the European Economic Community, which is the nations of Europe. Number two, the Western Economic Group, comprised of the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and Latin America. Number three, the Asiatic Group, which includes all of the industrial countries of Southeast Asia. These three groups are later to be placed under a central bank patterned after the Federal Reserve of the United States. Now these things are in print for our consumption, but the real motive is world domination, and by splitting the world up in thirds, they gain easier control. The European group is the most important group because it's involved the 10 toes. It is this group that intends to join together in a united group such as the United States. It is known as the EC Unification Movement. This comes from an act passed by the 12 member nations in 1986 and is to be completed by December 31st, 1992. The names of the countries involved in that signing were Italy, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Spain, Portugal, Luxembourg, Germany, Ireland, Greece, Great Britain, and Denmark. Others were to be brought in as things progressed. It is interesting to note that Iceland and Norway were left out and have not been included to date. Remember that Daniel said 3 horns would be plucked up by the roots or subdued. Now the key to understanding when the mark will be issued is in knowing the date of the completion of the unification movement. This movement is to bring in a single market, a single currency, and a single foreign policy. Thus all would give up their sovereignty and be governed by the European Parliament. The date set for completion is December 31, 1992. By this date, the plan of the secret combination is that they be in full power with their economic system complete with marking. For them to accomplish this, conditions will have to be such that they will be able to present and sell the mark as a solution to the economic collapse of all nations. This happens from 1 to several months before the completion date. We know that the mark will never be totally successful as a solution nor as a permanent economic system. It would rob all men of their free agency and thus destroy the church and kingdom of God upon the earth. All men will have to make a choice as to whether they will accept the mark and stand for the kingdom of the devil, or whether they will reject the mark and stand for the kingdom of God. Let's turn to Daniel chapter 2, verses 42 and 43, then a comment. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. The Lord said to Daniel that these nations would never cleave or unite one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. The dictionary reads under cleave, to adhere, cling, or stick fast, to be faithful. Under unite, the dictionary reads to bring together into a whole, to combine, to be or become bound together by adhesion. These nations will never do, for the Lord has promised. They will be racked by dissension and war, bringing about the destruction of the beast and the false prophet who put out the mark. In Book of Revelation, chapter 16, verses 1 through 12, we read of the plagues upon the beast and those who took the mark. And I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, Go your ways, and pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. And the third angel poured out his vial upon the waters, and the fountains of waters, and they became blood. And I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art, and wast, and shall be, because thou hast judged thus. For they have shed the blood of the saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. And I heard another out of the altar say, Even so, Lord God Almighty, true and righteous are thy judgments. And the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. And men were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which hath power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain, and blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and repented not of their deeds. And the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. We will discuss the kings of the east, representing the heathen nations, in the third tape of this series. Now we will turn to 3rd Nephi in the Book of Mormon, chapter 21, verses 14 through 19, telling of the destruction of America. Yea, woe be unto the Gentiles, except they repent. For it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Father, that I will cut off thy horses out of the midst of thee, and I will destroy thy chariots. And I will cut off the cities of thy land, and throw down all thy strongholds. And I will cut off witchcrafts out of thy land, and thou shalt have no more soothsayers. Thy graven images I will also cut off, and thy standing images out of the midst of thee, and thou shalt no more worship the works of thy hands. And I will pluck up thy groves out of the midst of thee. So will I destroy thy cities. And it shall come to pass that all lyings and deceivings and envyings and strifes and priestcrafts and whoredoms shall be done away. In summary, let's look at the time period of October 1989 to April of 1993 as established in the Scriptures. We can see clearly that the events that have transpired and are now transpiring bear witness to the truthfulness of the Scriptures, and that the time period established herein is correct. October 1989. The beast continues in its last 42 months. November 1990. 10 horns give their kingdom to the 8th beast, represented by the UN. December 31, 1992. The secret combination's preset date of full power to rule the earth with the mark of the beast. April 1993. Adam on Diamond. The beast and false prophet destroyed, and the millennium begins. Many believe peace will come about slowly but surely as we go about our daily lives, that men will somehow bring about peace, and the promised destructions will not come. Let's now read from Elder Bruce R. McConkie's conference address of April 1979. It is one of the sad heresies of our time that peace will be gained by weary diplomats as they prepare treaties of compromise, or that the millennium will be ushered in because men will learn to live in peace and to keep the commandments, or that the predicted plagues and promised desolations of latter days can in some way be avoided. In conclusion, let's read 3 Nephi chapter 10 verse 14. This verse is as applicable today as when it was given, for the scriptures are before us and will be fulfilled as spoken by the prophets. And now, whoso readeth, let him understand. He that hath the scriptures, let him search them, and see and behold if all these deaths and destructions by fire and by smoke and by tempests and by whirlwinds and by the opening of the earth to receive them, and all these things are not unto the fulfilling of the prophecies of many of the holy prophets. Let us requote President Benson. Satan is anxious to neutralize the inspired counsel of the prophet and keep the priesthood off balance, ineffective and inert, using perverse reasoning. For example, he will argue, there is no need to get involved in the fight for freedom. All you need to do is live the gospel. This is a contradiction, because we cannot fully live the gospel and not be involved in the fight for freedom. Our position on freedom helped get us to this earth, and it will make the difference as to whether we get back home or not. We need to stand for the Constitution. We and all good men will uphold it. When the nation shreds it to pieces and seeks to take our free agency from us, we should be willing to stand for it and the kingdom of God, even to the loss of our lives if necessary, for freedom is precious and must be paid for. Unauthorized copying of copyrighted material is dishonest. Exodus chapter 20, verse 15 states, "Thou shalt not steal." As Latter-day Saints, we should strive to be totally honest in our lives. The Today Through Armageddon series consists of 3 videotapes of approximately 2 hours each. Tape number 1, a scriptural account, is the foundation of the series, an overview of the Earth's divine timetable. It is a detailed cross-reference study of the scriptures and modern-day prophets regarding the 3.5 year time periods that take place before the second coming of Jesus Christ. Tape number 2, Mark of the Beast, is a detailed account of the 13th and 17th chapters of the book of Revelation and covers the first 3.5 year time period. the time we are now in, our recent history, today's events, statements of our modern prophets, founders and leaders of our nation, bankers, politicians, and admitted conspirators are used to bring understanding of our precarious position today. It details events to take place and their timing. Tape number 3, Battle of Armageddon,